talk to you a little bit about my dad. My dad and I were really close, and we were for pretty much my entire life. We were a lot alike, and we understood each other really well because we had really similar personalities. When I was a little girl, I had sort of somewhat of that like stereotypical, you know, daddy's little girl kind of relationship with my father. You know, he spoiled me a little bit and he doted on me and he was quite protective. Given all of that, it would probably be reasonable to assume that when I got a little bit older and I started dating and being a heterosexual teenage girl and, you know, young woman in my 20s, that my father would have sort of pulled that stereotypical protective dad thing of being like super suspicious of any boys that, you know, I was dating or I was interested in, and making those kind of jokes about, oh, pulling out the shotgun and, you know, pulling the guy aside and giving him that sort of menacing talk about like, oh, if you do anything to my daughter. He never did any of that, actually. Now that I'm older and I'm parenting my own child, I really appreciate that. And maybe it's because my own father never made those sorts of statements or made those sort of jokes that I've never been comfortable with that whole idea of, you know, the dad or the big brother or the uncle or, you know, whatever male family member kind of menacing, you know, a girl or a woman's partner or potential partner, you know, threatening him to make sure that he, you know, doesn't hurt her and doesn't do anything to her. And I know when people say things like that in the overwhelming majority of cases, they're just joking. It's the dad's job to protect his little girl, and, you know, isn't it sort of cute and funny that this other boy is coming around and, you know, getting this, you know, alpha male all riled up. One of the things that makes me uncomfortable about it is this idea that the daughter, sister, niece, granddaughter, whatever, that this girl, this woman is the possession of her male family members. I get the impulse to a fairly large degree, because even though, you know, I'm a parent, and even though in the like intellectual thinky part of my brain, I'm like, I know that my child doesn't belong to me, like, you know, this is my bed and that's my lamp and this is my room and these are things that I own. I don't own my child, yet at the same time, emotionally, there's still like this possessive, I don't know, feeling that I have around my child. And, you know, I felt it very strongly when he was first born as a baby, and I would carry him around and be like, this is my baby. I get why that's an impulse that parents or caregivers might have towards their kids, even as their kids get older and more capable of making their own decisions. I do think that there is a cultural component to it also, where generally speaking in our society, in our culture, we've been more accepting of that possessive instinct when it comes to girls and when it comes to women. There was a point in a lot of cultures, and it still exists in some cultures in the world today, where women are property. They are property and they exchange hands. You know, they go from being in their father's possession to, you know, a male partner's possession. So I think in North American culture, we still have remnants of that idea of women or girls being their father's possession. And so when we hear people express that idea of like, oh, you know, the dad being super protective and fending off, you know, potential suitors, God, I'm like from the 1800s. Yeah, but we still kind of accept that because it's this like sort of leftover from the days when it's like, yeah, women are literally, you know, the dad's property. As a woman, that makes me uncomfortable. I do not like the idea of being thought of as property. Probably also, especially as a Black woman, definitely some like serious cultural trauma around the idea of being talked about or treated as property, even in a joking way. Not so much of a fan. Then there's the other side of it that makes me uncomfortable as someone who is raising a boy. Now, admittedly, I don't know if my son is heterosexual or not, but assuming that he is, I don't like this sort of broad cultural assumption that if he is ever romantically or sexually interested in a girl, you know, that if he shows up at, you know, her house to take her out on a date or whatnot, that he is by his very nature doing something that's kind of predatory. That's, I don't know, it's just, it's depressing a little bit. And I think it's really unfair. You know, I don't want my son to grow up thinking that this is what society expects of him. Going back to my dad, what I really loved and appreciated about his approach to this whole thing when I did start becoming interested in boys and dating and stuff is that we talked about it. My dad wasn't actually really super comfortable talking to me about sex specifically when I was a teenager, but we did talk about relationships. You know, he just asked me what was going on with my life. You know, I could tell him when I had a crush on someone. He'd be like, oh, tell me about that person. And when he had concerns about who I was dating, he would bring it up with me. But again, not in this like, oh, if that boy does everything, I'm gonna beat him up. He'd just be like, look, like, you know, I noticed something is happening here. I'm not, like, I'm worried, are you okay? That was really helpful for me. And that doesn't mean that, you know, I didn't have difficulties in my relationships. I was young, I was new to dating. You know, I definitely had problems in different relationships, and I'll talk about some of those, I'm sure, in other blogs. But what was great is because my dad sort of expressed that he had trust in me and that he was letting me make my own decisions when I did have a hard time. It was easier to talk to him about it. His whole approach to me getting older and dating is one of the really great things that stands out in my head and that I hope to emulate with my own kid when he gets older. In the comments below, let me know how you feel about, you know, those jokes about the protective dad, you know, threatening the boyfriend or the crush or whatever. You know, do you just think, you know, maybe you just think it's harmless and funny, or maybe it's something that made you uncomfortable, or, you know, you may feel some other way about it. That's all. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye. Kids looking at porn online and how we can talk to them about that as their adult family members.